Cute. You. Hi. Hey, puppies. So there is a big chance if you're part of any part of the gaming community, you will have noticed that the gaming world has once again been swooped up by the fascination of Vikings. Last time this happened was in 2018 when we got God of War and we had Kratos. Everybody was fawning over him while he went around going boy. 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 But this time we are fascinated by two new cravings, which is Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Valheim. And please say I am not the only one that is like, I am and solo player only, that actually have crawled out of the cave of my solo game and sniffed on Valheim and gone like, this might be good. Or are you actually normal? Like a normal human being? But as I said, the world, and especially the gaming world, is once again fascinated by Vikings, and we can see that in the stats. Assassin's Creed sold over 1.7 million copies at launch date, and when I wrote this script, Valheim had actually sold over 5 million copies. And for me, it might sort of make sense. When the pandemic hit, all we needed was like a warm hug. So when Animal Crossing launches, we all wanted to make this cozy world on an island with our friends, building a community and make everything look so sweet. It gave us a sugar rush. But now, over a year into the pandemic, what we needed was the feeling of badassness, of exploring, of pillaging, of raiding. Of course, still with like a touch of friendship and community building, but this time the badass Viking way. Haha! We just like it hardcore now. Yeah. What we got blessed with were two absolutely amazing games about Viking that have one thing in common, and that is that they were absolutely stunning. So with two such stunning games with brilliant scenery and fun gameplay, it was of course natural for me to focus on that one thing I normally actually focus a lot about in games: the food. It is sort of because like I like games, I like food, now let's make them kiss. So I got inspired to start looking into what we know about the Vikings, what we know about the food and the culture, and what we presume they ate at that time. So to be able to sort of compare what we see they eat in Viking games and what we historically know Vikings ate, we need sort of three things. One, we need to define what we mean when we say the word Vikings. Two, we need to look at the food that we actually are presented by in the games. And three, we need to search for scientists that are willing to take time out of their busy day to actually talk to us. It's going to be easy, eh? So let us start on the top with History Lesson with Revia, Vikings 101. Did some research and I found that Store Norske Leksikon, which is Norway's biggest encyclopedia, or Google Translate, help!
Encyclopedia.
This word says that Vikings, or Norsemen, or Danes if you want to, was merchants, settlers or naval warriors from the Nordic countries who participated in travels through Europe to trade, settle new land and plunder in the period between about 800 to 1050. The etymological origin of the word Viking is actually disputed. We have one side that believe that it's a word to describe a person, and on the other side we have people that believe that it's a word to describe an action. But for sake of this video, I am going to use the word Viking when I talk about the people that lived in the quote-unquote Viking age. Now that we have a basic understanding of what Vikings are, I can go on to the next question, which is what do games tell us that Vikings actually ate? In other words, it is time to look at the mouth-watering, fantastic, beautiful, delicious food that these games have to offer us hungry puppies when we play the games. In Assassin's Creed, most of the food are only part of the world. It's there to look good, but it's not going to be touched. No
Touchy. No touchy. No touch.
Food you can consume in the games are often wild berries or mushroom you found when foraging around, or sometimes you can find pots and baskets filled with food, or you can also get some food if you kill wild animals. You cannot cook any meals in the game, and the food that you collect is only for regenerate food, though you can store surplus of food in a pouch that you can use whenever you are low on health. In Valheim, on the other hand, food gives us more valuable things like health, stamina and regeneration rate. Are you going to leave me? Bye! You can eat up to 3 foods at the same time, and the buffs, they will stack. You get food by foraging for berries or mushroom, fish, or hunt for meat, or you can grow your own vegetables. And the best part of all of this is that you can cook your own meals. What this game do is to present us with a larger variety of what is possible to make in the game. But then the question we need to ask is this actually realistic to what Vikings did eat at the time? And oh boy, there was more information out there than what I could ever imagine. So while I was pawing my way through Google, barking out keywords for the engine to find, I came across this article in forskning.no. It was an interview with Botanist Anneleen Kool about the Vikings and what they ate, and this gave me an idea. I sat down and I wrote an email to Anneleen and asked her if she wanted to join us and talk about gaming and talk about Vikings and talk about what Vikings actually ate. And to be honest, I actually didn't think she would reply to me. And oh boy, was I mistaken. Some weeks after my initial mail, Anneleen actually answered me and said that she would love to join an interview, and I now had to sit down and do the research to be able to hold an interview with a professional scientist with a PhD. So in the middle of March, I sat down and I called her on Teams with all my questions. I was shaking like a puppy. And what you will see now next is actually the interview I had with Anneleen Kool. Enjoy.
Can you introduce yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my name is Anneleen Kool. I work as a botanist at the Natural History Museum in Oslo. And at the Natural History Museum in Oslo, in the Botanical Garden, we have a garden feature called the Viking Garden. And I'm responsible for making sure that we have the right plants there. And I also run a research program around the Viking Garden. Basically finding out what plants people used during the Viking Age and also how they used them. And for some plants that's quite easy because we'll be able to guess that people just ate peas and different food plants. But for example, for medicinal plants, we don't actually really know how they were used because the Vikings didn't write.
Oh. So your way of doing the research and science is based on both the few things they did write down and then other findings?
Yeah, and on archaeological data. So there are quite a few finds of seeds from the Viking Age.
Oh.
In around settlements and in graves. And based on the seeds, we know what species were present, but we also know which ones were found close to each other. So we can say, okay, well, maybe this was a food item, or maybe this was used in beer brewing because we're finding hops and barley seeds in one find, for example.
In both the games I just told you about, Valhalla and Valheim, hunting and foraging is a big part of how you collect food and rations. But after I've read some articles trying to get some knowledge before the interview, I get sort of the impression that farming was more normal at the time than what maybe games and media shows us. Was farming normal?
Farming was normal, and so people had they had fields, and a lot of plants were cultivated. But people did also forage, and foraging has been an important part to expand Norwegian diets until the 1800s. So people have been, there's a word for it in Norwegian, matauk, where people go and collect things and catch things in nature to add to the cultivated diet, so to say. So they basically did both, but we know that they have been growing grains and vegetables and perhaps also medicinal plants around their houses.
So we can sort of say that hunting and foraging, farming was like a coexisting thing, or was one of them more, do we know if one of them was more normal than the other, or?
I think it also depended on the time of the year, and that different members of the household have different roles in hunting and farming and foraging.
I can presume that they ate a lot of things we necessarily, vegetables and plants we necessarily don't use today, or we look at sort of like that is not usable today.
We are looking into that actually, because there's quite some sort of forgotten plants in Norwegian nature and forgotten food in general. And one of the things that pops up there is angelica, which is a large plant up in the mountains. It's a member of the carrot family.
Hey.
It tastes a bit like celery, like a mixture of celery and soap, I would say. It's a bit of an acquired taste. I have a colleague in Iceland, and she explained that it's something you have to do from when you're very young, because otherwise you don't really learn to like it. But it's being referred to as something sweet, which is interesting because now we eat a lot of sugar, and back then people would get their sweetness from fruits and maybe a little bit of honey. Yeah. And then a plant like angelica would have been considered sweet, whereas we, with our like Western diets now, wouldn't call it very sweet at all. No. But it's a very fascinating plant, and it's becoming more popular to eat again.
That is cool, though.
Yeah.
I can't say I've seen that plant in the game, but I have seen honey. Honey is something that I've seen a lot of them. You see beehives. I do think I've seen even cultivated, like they had it as farming, well, beside farms, as like in a beekeeper, which I don't know what is in English right now. So I have seen it though, so that is cool that I at least got that part right. I haven't seen that many like special plants, if you want to say that. I have seen a lot of carrots and turnips and most of the cabbage, things like that, but things that is easily recognizable for my view of the world today. And
the carrots are an interesting one, because there are lots of finds of carrot seeds from around Viking villages, and they show up very often. But carrot as a vegetable wasn't introduced to Scandinavia until the 1500s. It was cultivated in the Afghanistan area, and the use as a vegetable slowly moved north, and it didn't get here until after the Viking Age. One of the reasons people might have been using carrots, because carrots do grow wild as well, is that nowadays or earlier on, it was common, the seeds were commonly used in a tea that decreased female fertility. So they might have been used as a contraceptive, like anti-conception pills. So you always find carrots at Viking markets and everything, and it's true, it's the same plant, but it wasn't domesticated in a way that made it very edible or very nice to eat.
I have the sort of impression from the Viking Age, or from what the media shows me about the Viking Age, that the diet was heavily based on different kinds of meat, and that they were main categories. That was like their main source of food. But after reading a bit more about it, it seems like vegetables are more normal than it's often perceived in media. Did they use a lot of vegetables?
They did. So it's true. The picture that you get shown from Vikings is usually like a rather large, hairy man and a pig above a fire being roasted. And that might have been the case around funerals and big parties and sort of things. So there are difference in the finds between things that are grave goods and things that are like common daily use of food. And there, so the daily settlements and farms and so on, there's a lot more greens and vegetables than there is in the grave goods. So meat, like especially like slaughtering an animal and eating it, of course that was being done, but not all the time and not in incredible amounts.
Okay.
But people did go fishing, and there's a lot of data on fish being eaten, but there's also a considerable amount of vegetables.
What was the most common vegetables at that time? Do we know that? Do we have any finding for what is most usual to find of vegetables?
What people were eating all the time, vegetable-wise. I don't know exactly about the quantities that things were found in, but peas were common and different cabbages. There's even some types of cabbage growing on the Shetland Islands that people think might have been introduced during the Viking Age there, Shetland cabbage. Different, so parsnips were relatively common. But mainly the cabbage-based things, I would say, and onions. And angelica. Yeah. So angelica was not only collected from the wild; it was grown in gardens. So people were cultivating it, and it's in medieval law texts. It's explained what you can do to a person who's been stealing your angelica from your garden. You can take all his clothes and everything he's wearing, and
yeah. So at least that one was.
That one was central actually.
Central, yeah.
And it's one of the few that's also mentioned in the saga as how Olav Tryggvason gives his wife a stalk of angelica to make her happy again, and then she doesn't get very happy and sends him off to war instead. So yes, eat your vegetables.
Eat your vegetables, yeah. Oh, that is cool. But what about fruits? We don't see much about fruits in any of the games. We maybe see some apples sometimes. We know today we have the possibility to grow fruits outside here in Norway, but did they do it in that time as well?
Yeah. So there's a find of 54 apples from the Oseberg ship. They were rather small, but they were still apples, and they were worthwhile to send with somebody to the afterlife. And so apples for sure. People also ate berries, raspberries. There are different plums show up, and cherries. And there's also even finds of grape seeds from Gotland so that might have been like to symbolize wine. People were importing wine from France, but it might also have been that it's something they tried to grow, or that where it was a gift to somebody to put some raisins with them in a grave. There's even some finds of peaches from northern Denmark, or northern Germany, southern Denmark, in a city, a Viking city called Hedeby. And it's not a lot of finds of peaches. It's just a few of the stones, but it looks like they have tried to cultivate it. So that's yes, there's quite some evidence for the use of fruits and in Viking Age food.
Do we know if they farmed it, cultivated it, or was it more something they brought with them on their travels?
So the peaches are probably an experiment, but other things, so apples and so on, I guess. Well, it's difficult to tell because people wouldn't if you wouldn't find a whole apple tree or anything, but it's likely that they were grown. And you can also, if you have some apples around your village and you throw out some apple seeds, you'll get more apple trees, right? So there's this gray zone between things being grown on purpose and things showing up because people throw out the waste. things
Good
that they
point.
eat anyway. But people were most likely cultivating them as well, and experimenting with it.
That is cool though. Do
Yeah.
they sort of, because grapes, that was fun that you actually said grapes. We see actually a place where in a Viking town, or when we were over in England in one of the games, where it grapes outside on like a big blanket. It lies outside for like making wine or drying them or something they're going to do with them. But it made me curious, because we know the Vikings drank mead. Did they also drink wine of different kinds, or was that more from the rest of Europe?
They probably imported the wine, because there's finds of wine barrels and the barrels are often made of a type of tree that doesn't necessarily grow up here. And we know also from the saga that people drank wine in like luxury parties or big feasts. The same goes probably for the meat, that it wasn't a day-to-day thing to drink, because keeping bees is a challenge in Norway now, and people do it, but it's difficult to keep your bee colonies alive, and it might have been that it was easier to import part of the honey at least, and that it wasn't super available. And what people were drinking mostly was beer, and beer had like an import. There were different types of beer. There was beer for the day-to-day drinking, and there were like heavier beers for feasts. But people were using beer also in like social gatherings and in ritual events. So for example, the word for ale shows up in many contexts that have something to do with protection or with life-changing events. So there's gravøl for like grave beer or funeral beer, but there's also the Norwegian word barsel, which refers to barns øl, to the beer you would drink around the birth of a child. So that's and beer. So there's also records from just after the Viking Age where people asked the Pope in Rome if it was okay to baptize children in beer instead of wine, because that's what we did here. And the Pope in Rome said no, but still the fact that they asked shows what role beer had in society. And we also find that there's many different plants used in beer brewing. So there's yarrow, for example, and bog myrtle, and there's hops also, probably introduced just before or around the Viking Age as a beer brewing plant. So there's quite a lot of evidence there. And beer, of course, it's a way to clean water, to make sure. So if you grow yeast in water, you can be quite sure that there's nothing else growing in it. So you would add plants to preserve it. And it's also a good way to get some calories. So people would, so if you have a harvest of grains and it gets a little bit wet, which you would often get because it's raining a lot, the grains start germinating, and that's basically how you make beer. You germinate the grains and then you dry them over an open fire, and then you have made malt, and malt is what is being used in beer brewing then. So it's a way to get a lot of food out of a slightly spoiled harvest of grains.
It's smart though. It's really smart. Yeah, using every opportunity you have or everything that you have available for you.
Yeah, to preserve food and to, I mean, it's also a way to keep it around. Yeah.
That's really cool. That was way more than what I've had been able to read up like the couple of weeks I've trying to read about it. So it's cool. There is so much information now I have never even thought about. So that's really cool.
We keep finding things as well. It's
It's no, that is cool. But we did talk about a bit earlier about foraging, and we talked about berries, that they had berries. I presume also they maybe had mushrooms.
They probably did. The thing with mushrooms is that they don't preserve very well, so we don't find them in excavations, but it doesn't mean that they weren't there.
But have you any proof or knowledge about making things out of the raspberries, like jam?
No, not that I know of. And that's something, I mean, that's another thing, right? People wrote down battle stories and not recipes for jam or how they got rid of their headache. So it's also in part it's because there's so much focus on the warfare already then. Although these things undoubtedly were part of daily life, it's just that they weren't written down.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're trying to do in our projects is to see, okay, are there any things we do today or have been done until recently that we can sort of extrapolate back in time and say, okay, they were likely something people did back then as well. So I mean, making jam to some extent, but now we do make jam by adding lots of sugar, and they certainly wouldn't have done that. But I think people must have had ways to keep food through winter, otherwise they wouldn't have survived.
In both of the games, it is normal to travel a lot, especially in the Assassin's Creed game where we travel all the way to England. And then I'm a bit curious, how did they then preserve food? Like, how could they have rations to take with them for such a long journey?
On these travels. Mm-hmm. There's some evidence that people actually took quite a lot of food and live animals and with them on trips like that. And of course, I mean, a trip to England, it's far, but you're not on the way for months or something. It's not that far.
No.
So people would have brought seeds and a couple of animals and etc. to take with them when they would go somewhere to colonize a new area. They would probably also learn from the local people that they got in touch with. But Iceland, for example, was empty when they got there.
If we two were to make a game together about Vikings, what kind of food would you like to see in that kind of game?
I would like to have some focus on some of the wild plants that people were using, just to open people's eyes for the role that plants played. And so, for example, juniper and angelica and these onions, they're things that we don't normally think about now. And we know that they were very important in the Viking Age, and that they are still widely available everywhere here. So I think that's some like details on how to use those, or making sure that you set up your village in a place where you have access to them, or how you maybe even dig them up and take them with you when you go somewhere else. That's something I would like fascinating to put in there. And also perhaps because the Vikings were traveling a lot, like you say, and people were getting in touch with different cultures, and we know that the way people in Scandinavia did agriculture changed during the Viking Age. For example, it became popular to sow grains in the fall, so they would come up early in the spring. So maybe some more on that cultural exchange, how you travel, you get in touch with Arabs, so you get in touch with people in Russia, and you get in touch with people in the Slavic countries, and and what happens when you meet people. Because I don't think there is, of course, a lot of focus on the warfare, but it was also a lot of trade, and Vikings were serving in the courts in Constantinople, Mikkel's court. So people were they were very much like intercultural and interested in other people and what they did. So I think that would be an aspect, how you learn about plant use from others. And also I think I don't know how it is in these games, but the role of women, the fact that women often did join on these colonization trips, and probably also took part in battle, and were running the farms, and were responsible for the household and the slaves, and the keepers of the keys. And so I think that's something that I also would like to see in in a dream game, but maybe that's happening already.
Yeah, it does seem like that is a shift that is happening. Assassin's Creed have earlier actually gotten a bit critique for actually that, because this is a long game series, so they have from other cultures and other historical times, and they have had a bit of a critique of like they have only focused on the male role in the society at that time. Well, here in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, for the first time you can actually play as a woman. You can have she is the main character, and she also, like, you see there are not only male coming on these travels, not only on the raids or anything, that we see them in different roles. So it seems like that is a change that is happening in the general how they show Vikings. So that is something that seems like they start. Seems like it's starting to some degree, of course.
Because if there's I mean, the fact that there's so much gender equality in Scandinavian countries, I think that could very well be a leftover from the Viking Age. So in the same way, there might be leftovers from the Viking Age in the way we use plants, but that's one that where it's very clear and very different from the rest of the world.
That was all the questions I had for today. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for learning me a lot of things.
Very nice. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
So it has now gone a few months and I have watched and edited the interview and gotten myself a new haircut. What do you think? And oh my god, I have learned a lot. I can understand why game developers want to show us food that we might recognize and what we think is part of the Viking Age. Though I do agree with Anneleen that it would be cool to see a broader pictures of fruits, vegetables and meals when it comes to games that are set in the Viking area. So I'm crossing my fingers that in the future we will see that game developers will dabble into the more scientific knowledge we have from the Viking Age. And when we talk about science, please do give Anneleen a big thanks for taking her time out of her day to join us for this amazing interview. Her knowledge of this field has made this video to be something that I could never ever imagine it to be. So I'm honored to have the possibility to have been working with her. So thank you, Anneleen, thank you so much. And if you want to check out Anneleen's project, I am going to link the Viking garden and everything else that I found down below in the description. And now you might think, what are we going to do with all of this information? Well, I do think it's time for me to take you puppies with me into the kitchen and make some food. So let's just say the newfound knowledge we have learned today will come to good use. But it is time for me to ask you, what did you think about this video? Have you learned something new about Vikings? And what fact did surprise you the most? Please do comment it all down in the comment section and tell me if your views about Vikings have changed. If you liked the video, make sure you pour that subscribe button, because in here we do everything gaming but gaming. And if you ever want to catch me live, I am live over at Twitch 3 times a week, so come check me out. And now it's time for me to say thank you so much for watching the video. And if you're new here, welcome to the Puppy Gang. And if it's night where you are, may you have a good night. Sleep tight and do not let the bed bugs bite. See you later, my friends. Bye!